And welcome back to Community IQ. I'm your host, Garrett Pinnell, and looking forward to the continuation of the conversation. To engage and to encourage, building up versus tearing down. Voices of our community, Community IQ. So, Bruce Duncan, Part 2. Stay tuned for Part 3. So, Bruce, getting back to that chapter of life, my man, you go to college.
Right.
You see Tallahassee. You see how those big boys are playing.
Right.
And finally, the career opportunity begins.
Yep. I started practicing law in Lake City, Florida, right out of law school, and went to work for an insurance defense firm up there, and did that for a little over a year. And I knew I had to come back home. All my brothers had left the area. Growing up in Lake County as a Duncan with the history of the family here was difficult. A lot of pressure on you, but I chose to come back home and to try to carry on the traditions of the family. And so I returned to Lake County and went to work as a public defender. Again, the adage from my mother, of those to whom much is given, much is expected in return, the biblical lesson for us all. And so I chose to represent people who couldn't afford their own lawyer, paid by the state to represent those people. It wasn't the best pay in the world, but it was an amazing experience. I spent a lot of time on my feet in the courtroom as a public defender, experience you would not get as a young lawyer in a firm. You find yourself pushing papers primarily. So I got a lot of courtroom experience, tried several cases, learned how to operate on my feet. In law school, I say this all the time, they teach you how to think like a lawyer in law school, but they don't teach you how to be a lawyer. You learn how to be a lawyer by practicing law. That's the term. And so I learned how to be a lawyer in the public defender's office for a number of years. I became the assistant county attorney for Lake County. My great uncle had been the county attorney. Two of my great uncles had been county attorney for a long time, number of years. So I went into the county attorney's office, became the economic development director for Lake County for a while, really outside the aspect of practicing law, but certainly utilized the knowledge that I had practicing law. That was an attempt on my part to try to bring jobs and strong industry to Lake County. Again, after the freezes, trying to diversify our economy. Enjoyed that. Went into private practice, really got married, went into private practice, and became a partner at a law firm over in Mount Dora, where I started focusing on land use and government law. My experience in the county attorney's office and working for the county gave me an opportunity to help people get through the system, as I said earlier, to do a lot of zoning cases, a lot of land development, which there was a lot of that going on in Lake County. So I became a land use and government lawyer. I did a lot of special master work for the jurisdictions in the county, and for the property appraiser's office, I did all the ad valorem tax exemptions for agricultural cases and homestead exemption cases. I did a lot of those. I represented Lake Sumter EMS, eventually became one of the lawyers. And when I say one of the lawyers, I mean one of many for the villages, and represented several of the community development districts up there, both commercial and residential. So my practice really began to become very successful. Unfortunately, I began to move away from my foundation. I continued heavily involved in the community, several boards and committees, lots of organizations, did a lot of MC work for charitable auctions and teachers' banquets and teacher of the year banquets and things like that. My personal skills, the relationships that I built. So I continue to do a lot of community service work, but unfortunately I began to do it for the wrong reasons. I was doing it to pat myself on the back as opposed to doing it for the sake of service. I started drinking a good bit. I think in large part because I was becoming empty, because I wasn't doing the things. I wasn't going to church. I wasn't reading my Bible. I wasn't saying my prayers, all the things that keep you grounded. And I began to feel like, all these wonderful things that were happening to me were happening because of me, because of my hard work, because of my dedication, because blah, 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 me, and not recognizing that these were all blessings and gifts from God that He had given me for a purpose. And so I turned away. I don't say I turned away, but I walked away from God and from, again, my teachings and my foundation. And as a result of that, I started going down a very dark path. I was married for a long time, married to another young lady here out of Lake County that was from another long-time Lake County family. And my career was taking off, man. I mean, I was making more money than I ever thought I would make. I was living in a bigger house than I ever dreamed I'd live in. All those kind of things were coming into place, but it wasn't filling the void. And I didn't understand why. I do now in retrospect, but at the time it was happening, I really didn't quite understand what was going on. The community service was great. But again, I wasn't doing it always for the right reasons. I had an opportunity to help a lot of children get scholarships to go to college and to earn, take stock in children, Education Foundation. I was involved in those, Junior Achievement, Lake County Fair Association, Leadership Lake County, all boards that I served on, Lifestream Behavioral Center, which I'm proud to acknowledge that I served as chairman of that board for a long time, but I just got reappointed to the Lifestream board yesterday. So I'm
definitely congratulations, my man.
you. After a long and state-imposed sabbatical, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, I'm back in the community and trying to get myself back involved, and this time trying to do it for the right reasons. So that was a big step.
And Bruce, man, I appreciate that. And I say this for encouragement for you and for anybody. One of the best characters for me in the Bible is King David.
Yeah.
King David.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously starting off on a good foot, King of Israel.
Right.
A prophet of God. But he too found a dark place. And the most encouraging part of that, commits adultery.
Right.
Tries to hide that sin by having the husband killed. And through all that, truly did repent. God forgave, and he got back on his feet.
Yes.
And he continued to move forward, and we know how the rest of that story goes. And if nobody's familiar, please read that chapter.
Right.
Super encouragement.
Well, I mean, David wrote most of the Psalms. I mean, and those Psalms are incredibly uplifting and encouraging. They got me through some tough times. Yeah.
And I think when it's all said and done, Bruce, what a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
What a beautiful thing that God so valued Bruce's life that he allowed you to experience where some of these choices would take you,
right,
to bring you to the realization of what truly is important so that you can continue to help many, many more people.
Well, you've heard this before. Sometimes God has to knock you on your back to make you look up. And that's exactly what happened to me. And if you're ready, we can talk about that. I'm not proud of what happened to me, but I am not ashamed of it because, as you just pointed out, it was ordained by God that I endure what I endured because it made me a much better person. Much better human, a much better servant, and a much more faithful man. So,
well, Bruce, let's start at the beginning because so many people know you, Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
So many people, when they heard that news, were just in shock.
Right.
And I have to apologize right up front because should I have visited Bruce in prison? Absolutely. Could I have wrote Bruce a letter? Absolutely. And that was a good lesson for me in the future.
Right.
With anybody, how important that is to show that encouragement, Bruce.
Right. Well, I mean, I was blessed, Garrett, with so many people, and we'll talk about that at length. But
Take us to the night. Take
Yeah.
us to the night, and
Yeah.
go right ahead and.
Right. Well, I went to a Gator game, as I have done on 100+ occasions in Gainesville, from the time I was a young boy all the way up until the last one I went to was 2010. But this night, it was October 17th, 2009. Florida was playing Arkansas in Gainesville. It was Tim Tebow's senior year, so everybody was excited. Florida was undefeated. Things were going good. Went up to the Arkansas game, and it happened to be the weekend that my wife's high school reunion was going on. And it's an example of making bad decisions. I probably should have stayed home, and I should have escorted her to her high school reunion, but instead I chose to go to the Gator game. I went up there. I did what I always did. I drank while I was there. Drove home after the game, was trying to get home. We had a babysitter at the house. My wife's best friend had a couple of kids. They were staying at our house for the high school reunion. I wanted to get home, relieve the babysitter, and I made a left-hand turn into the subdivision after drinking all day and pulled in front of a motorcyclist, a gentleman by the name of Herbert Stephen Muller, a very good man, a United States Navy veteran, veteran of the Vietnam War. He was a medic, like my father, in Vietnam in the Navy. He had retired from the post office recently, so he had been a civil servant. Spent a good portion of his days raising money and collecting toys for children at Christmas who didn't have toys. Just all-around good guy, somebody who didn't deserve what I did to him that night, and I took his life when I pulled in front of him. Several police officers, Florida Highway Patrol, and the scene became madness. There were dozens of sheriff's deputies' cars there and several Florida Highway Patrol vehicles there. And word started to get out and people started to show up, and they took my blood and subsequently found out down the road that my blood alcohol level was 0.16, twice the legal limit. And so in February of 2010, I was charged with DUI manslaughter, which carries with it a minimum of 4 years in prison. I was well aware of the law. So I knew the night of the accident that my life was about to change dramatically. Not only from a legal point of view and from incarceration and all the things that would go with it, but that I would never, ever be able to live down the notion or the knowledge that I had taken a man's life. It's not an easy thing to endure. So I will always know that. I will always have that image of that individual in my head and always use it as motivation to try to honor him in as many ways as I can for the rest of my life. But anyway, several months went by trying to take care of business and excuse me, and to get my financial affairs in order as best I could, make sure that my now ex-wife, was taken care of as best I could. And on August 15th of 2011, I turned myself into the Lake County Jail, knowing that I was going to eventually go to prison. Had no idea how long it was going to be. That was going to be up to the judge. We had a strategy to try to present the evidence that I had, lived a pretty good life up until that point, a life of service and to the community. Several folks, elected officials, came and testified on my behalf. But on September 30th, 2011, I was sentenced to 124 months in prison, 10 years and 4 months. And on October 3rd, 2011, they took me to Lake Butler, Florida, which was the processing center for this region. And they put me in what I was not aware of at the time. They came and pulled me out of the line. We were being processed in the prison, and the guy came and tapped me on the shoulder. He said, "You're coming with me." He said, "You're going to protective management." I said, "I don't know what that is. I've never been to prison before in my life." He said, "Well, it's for your own good." Over the next 15 days, I probably heard that a dozen times. It's for your own good. So they put me in it's basically confinement, one-man cell. And all I had literally was my Bible and several pieces of paper and envelopes and stamps. So I had nothing else to read. So I literally, in 15 days, I read the Bible from cover to cover. And it gave me an opportunity to introduce myself to. I'd read the Bible before, but this time I really got a chance to read it and listen to it in my head. And a lot of the answers to the questions that I had were right there in that book. And so I knew then that if I was going to survive what I was about to endure, I could not do it without the help of God. It just wasn't going to happen. I'll preface this by saying that after the accident, I quit drinking. I started going to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I had about 16 months of sobriety prior to my going to prison. I will tell you this. If you want it in prison, you can get it. People say, "Oh, it's easy to be sober in prison." It's not. It's easy. You can get anything you want in prison. And I continued to maintain my sobriety while I was in prison. I'm almost 11 years sober. April of next year, I'll be 11 years sober. And I'm proud of that. But,
That's awesome.
Yeah. So they assigned me to Zephyr Hills, which was a decent prison as prisons go. It's a maximum security prison. There is no thing other than a maximum security prison in Florida. So I'm at Zephyr Hills Community Correctional Institution, and that's where I did the bulk of my time. About almost 7 years, 6.5, 7 years of my time was spent at Zephyr Hills. Had a number of jobs. I taught GED while I was there, trying to help, and had an opportunity to see some young men graduate with their high school diploma in prison. I worked for several different departments there at the prison. I typed legal briefs. I didn't do any legal research. I refused to. I worked in the tool room. I worked for the classification department. Again, I taught GED classes. And I read incessantly while I was there. I was blessed with a lot of people who sent me magazines and newspapers and books. I tried to make the best of my time, stayed out of all the mess. As they tell you when you go into prison, stay away from gambling, gangs, and gays. The 3 Gs. Those are the 3 things that can get you in trouble. And so I stayed away from that, stayed away from the drugs and the alcohol that was available, stayed away from cigarettes. Cigarettes were prohibited in prison while I was there. It happened right before I got to prison. So I quit smoking as a result of that too. So that was another positive that came out of this mess. My relationship with God was strengthened, another positive. My relationship with so many people in my life was strengthened, another positive. They tell you if you want to find out who your true friends are, get arrested. And I found out who my true friends were. And I'm very blessed to have a lot of them. A lot of strong family members who have stood by me. My ex-wife's family stood by me. My ex-wife stood by me for 5.5 years. Always had visits on the weekends. Always had letters every night. And always wrote letters every day. I estimated one time I probably wrote over 7,000 letters while I was in prison. Yeah, I received at least that many. So I was very blessed. Continue to be very blessed. But prison was not an easy thing to endure, especially.
And I want to get to that. Yeah. Bruce, the environment. I can only imagine, because were you not placed with rapists and murderers?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, child molesters, rapists, murderers, you name it. I was in there with them. And
So did they just leave you alone, or did you have to stand your ground?
well, the first couple of months, you got to stand your ground a couple of times. And, as you pointed out earlier, I'm not a small guy. I'm a big guy. They don't, they like to pick on the weak. And I carried myself very clearly that I was not somebody that they were going to push around or push over. And there were a couple of instances early in the prison where I had to stand my ground, so to speak. And once you do that and make clear that you're not one to mess with, they'll leave you alone. And I had the respect of the guards quickly. They know. They knew what the situation was. They knew my background. You could Google my name and it all comes up. There's no hiding anymore in today's world. So they knew what the situation was. They knew the background I'd come from and the career that I'd had and all that kind of stuff. So, that helped with the guards not really messing with me too much, and the inmates didn't want to mess with me too much. And as time went on, they realized that I'm not going to mess with them either. I'm not going to get in the middle of their little games that they play or their little hustles that they have, or, you keep to yourself. I mean, that's the best way to survive in prison is to keep to yourself and stay out of all that mess. And if you do that, you can get through it. And I kind of alluded to this earlier, Garrett, but I mean, I grew up in a great family, a great community, with many, many, many gifts and blessings that the good Lord gave me. So I had a pretty easy life. I never had to go to war. I was in between wars, never had to go to war. I never really lost a parent or any of the things that are so tragic in somebody's life. I didn't have a lot of tragedy in my life. I wasn't really challenged up until this point. But this was a challenge, man. This was what kind of man are you? How much can you endure? How strong can you be? And this was the first time in my life I was really tested. And I learned that I am capable of more than I ever thought I would be capable of. And so another positive that came out of this. And you just have to look for those. You have to look for the good that comes with the bad. I mean, I was separated from my family, my life. The Florida Bar Association tried to disbar me, but it was a judge named Judge forgotten his name now, up in Gainesville. I've got his great judge. He's retired now, but he listened to the case and he said that no, this guy is not a candidate for disbarment. He had, I was an AV rated lawyer, which means I was the highest ranked quality and highest ranked ethics of the lawyers. Your fellow lawyers rank you. So, I had a very good career, and he said, no, we're not going to disbar this guy. We're going to suspend him. So there is a possibility that I could go back to practicing law one day if I choose to do that. So, I had a lot of good things happen to me while I was in prison. Had a lot of bad things happen to me while I lost my wife of 23 years, decided that she couldn't do it anymore. It was very hard on her. I have no bad feelings or anything. But she had to go, and she met someone else while I was in prison, and so our marriage ended. That was very difficult, very hard, because she was the one thing that I had as a guaranteed tie to the outside. But as I said before, her family continued to stand by me, continued to come and visit me, even after that. So. I have lots of friends that came, lots of family, lots of business acquaintances. Tell one funny story. I had a lot of lawyers that would come and see me. They cannot restrict you from having contact with your attorneys, and your lawyers can come see you pretty much any time. They can't restrict that. One day, several local lawyers who I won't name them, but they're all around here. A lot of them. A lot of them work about less than a mile from here. But 6 of them came to see me one day. They called me out of my job, told me I had a lawyer visit. So I show up and there's 6 lawyers up there. Well, we stepped outside at the visitors park, which is an enclosed area, but it's a gate. And the warden walks by and he looks over and wonders what the heck's going on. And I see the warden turn around and he goes back to the control center and he comes back by and he's looking, he's shaking his head, and he goes back to his office in the back there. And that night I'm sitting in my bunk and the sergeant comes by. He says, "Duncan, the warden wants to see you." That's never a good thing. So he escorts me to the warden's office. I go in. The warden says, "Come in here and close the door." So I go in there and close the door. I'm not going to say exactly what he said because this is a family program. But he said, "Who are you? Are you John Gotti?" I said, "No, sir, I'm not John Gotti." He said, "Who the hell has 6 lawyers come and see him in one day?" I said, "Well, sir, I know who you were." I said, "Well, I got a lot of things going on the outside." That's all I said. He just looked at me. He shook his head. He said, "Get out of here." So I left his office and they escorted me back to the dorm. But that was I mean, my life in prison was a little unique compared to most inmates. And that's God carrying me through it is what it was. And sending these people to see me. It's the old story. Jesus, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was naked, you clothed me. And when I was in prison, you came to see me. And they said, "Lord, when did we do these things?" He said, "When you do this unto the least of these, my brethren, you do it unto me." And I think that that's what these folks were doing, man. They were coming to carry me, put me on their shoulders and carry me across this finish line, this 124-month finish line. So, prison was, it was tough. And without the grace of God, I wouldn't have made it.
And that kind of gets to my next question, mindset. The last program we talked about Joseph and how he was not able just to survive. He thrived with that mindset. And the other story that comes to mind, the only thing I can try to compare is the movie Shawshank Redemption. And I'm not saying the corruption that you experience on the inside, but I'm sure there's a lot of similarities. What is a story that you could share where, it took a lot of courage to get through? And then I want to know about the mindset.
Yeah.
Every day you woke up, how did that mindset start?
Well, I mean, I was challenged early on as I said before. A couple of guys wanted to do to me what had been done to Andy Dufresne in Shawshank Redemption, and I absolutely made it clear that wasn't going to happen, that if they were going to do it, they were going to have to kill me. And, I just stood up and I fought for my life, really, and took some blows, but gave some blows, and fortunately the guards heard what was going on. They came in and broke it up. Otherwise, had they not come in when they did, because there were more of them than there was of me, I might not have survived that, but I was able to at least fight them off long enough for the guards to come in and intervene. That was probably the toughest day in prison from a fear point of view. Literally, fearful for your life. Other than that, I never had another instance like that because I learned, word got around that, he ain't going to lay down. And that's really what they want. These are not the best people in the world, Garrett, that I'm housed with. So they don't really like to be challenged. They like to pick on the weak and the infirmed, and that's what they do. That's how they, they're criminals, so they look for victims. I'm not a victim, and I wasn't going to be a victim. So, it's funny you bring up Shawshank. My friends always made fun of that and teased me about that, and even a couple of the guards called me Andy Dufresne.
That's awesome.
But I provided legal advice for some of the guards and some of the staff members there at prison from whenever they asked. I didn't expect anything or ask for anything in return. It's just the right thing to do, and so by doing that, you earn the respect of the guards. They don't want to mess with you, and the inmates will reflect what the guards. They're jealous of it, but they see that the guards respect you, and so they'll respect you as well. And you get nicknames in prison. Unc Dunk was one of mine for some of the younger kids, and they'd come for advice or help with their classwork or excuse me, whatever. Pops, which I did not like, but the white hair kind of gives that away. So I didn't care being called Pops. Old School, it's another one that I didn't really like. But as long as they're calling you nice names, they're not calling you other names. So,
righto. So when you would wake up, I'm sure you would definitely have those prayers.
Yep.
And what was that mindset? Really, what went through your head on a daily basis?
Garrett, that's a great question. And I always tried to make a list of things for which I should be thankful. And I still do that to this day. If I have trouble sleeping, I'll just lie awake. I had this conversation with a very dear friend of mine yesterday who's strong in his faith. And he's having trouble sleeping. And I said, Mark, here's what I always did. I mean, when in prison, sometimes it's hard. There's always light. There's always noise. Sometimes it's hard to sleep. I would start out with the simplest of things. God, thank you for the oxygen that I breathe. And Lord, thank you for the water that comes out of that tap that sustains me every day. And thank you for the grass outside my window that I look at and remind myself of what nature can be. The simplest little things, and you go down that list until you get to the bigger things. Thank you, God, for the mom and the pop that you gave me, and for my brothers, and thank you, God, for the friends and for the letters that I received. And you just start making a list, man. Sometimes you try to get that list to be 40, 50, 60, 70 things that you're going down that list, and reminding yourself that no matter how bad it is, I have more to be thankful for than I have to be sorrowful for. That was my mindset, was to always try to maintain an attitude of thankfulness. Now, don't get me wrong, brother. There were some dark times in there, man. I've got a very dear friend of mine, Duncan, who, Quinette is like a sister to me. I never had a sister growing up. I had 3 brothers. And I met Quinette in 1990, actually 1989. So Quinette and I have been friends for over 30 years now, and we grew close over those years. And her faith, man, is something every person should be envious of. And boy, Quinette would, sometimes literally reach across the table at a visit and slap me upside the head when I'd start moaning and crying, about, sometimes literally crying about my life and why is God doing this to me, and what did I ever do to deserve this, and didn't I always try to be a good guy, and all those kind of things. And Quinette would, sometimes literally slap me upside the head and say, quit your crying, buddy, look around you. Could be a lot worse. You get out of here one day. A lot of these guys don't ever get out of here. A lot of these guys don't have money on their account. They don't get letters every night. They don't get phone calls and visits. So, what did Oscar Wilde say? One of my favorite, true friends stabs you in the front. Well, that was Quinette, man. She stabbed me in the front a lot. A lot of people did. I had people that would let me cry on their shoulders, and that's good. You need those. But I also needed the ones that would, slap me around a little bit and remind me that, hey, man, you better buck up, buddy. You got a life to lead after this.
Well, that concludes part 2 of the Bruce Duncan story. Stay tuned for part 3 coming soon. And remember, make it a great day.